Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Renee Battle-Brooks. I am the Executive Director of the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. We are the county's civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. Our office initiates or investigates complaints of civil rights discrimination. We combat human trafficking around the region. We ensure equitable language access to county government services. And we provide community programming, such as today's conversation, to build understanding across diverse peoples. Today, we welcome in conversation hosts of the Kinswoman podcast and authors of the new book, Real Friends Talk About Race, Bridging the Gaps Through Uncomfortable Conversations. Regular followers of our programming are familiar with our Elephant We Don't See Diversity Dialogue series with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. And we are so excited to partner with the library system today to bring you this conversation, thematically similar to much of our work together. This program is also brought to you in partnership with the United States Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you my co-host for today's conversation, Tanya Lennox, Education Outreach Coordinator with the EEOC's Philadelphia Field Office. In fact, it was Tanya who brought this book to our attention, so thank you so much for that, Tanya.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Renee. I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely. So Real Friends Talk About Race is an essential guide for those who want to have a stronger interracial relationship with others, whether it's friends, colleagues, or loved ones. We are happy to welcome authors Yseult Mukantabana and Hannah Summerhill. Yseult identifies as Rwandan, Jewish, and a queer woman. She is an author, creative director, and social and art advocate. She sits on the Board Committee of POWarts or POW.
Yeah, it's POWarts.
Power, thank you. A nonprofit organization meant to support and uplift women in the art industry. She is a TED speaker and the designer and co-founder of YOAH. And I'm sorry we didn't get a chance before we started. So if you could tell me, is it YOAH?
No, it's YOAH. It's like Noah, but with a Y.
Thank you. YOAH, a gender-free children's brand created with her brother, Noah Polfliet. Hannah Summerhill is white, Jewish woman based in California. She's had a long career in magazines, working in advertising sales at places like Vogue, Cosmopolitan, and Women's Health. And as a writer, she's written for brands like Vogue.com, Elle.com, New York Magazine, and Refinery 29. She's on the board of her city's Equality Coalition and plays guitar in her free time. Welcome, all of you. We are so thrilled that you both were able to join us, and Tanya, that you were able to join us as co-host. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. So Tanya.
Thank you so much, Renee. I am so glad to be here. You just don't know. When I got the news that we were able to get a hold of these two women, I was kind of ecstatic, like a young kid. Of course, EEOC, we promote diversity and equity inclusion with the DE and I and A, and it's in principle. And we go out and we train. We enforce the law of those people who have been discriminated against. But when we start talking about the reality is, that means we have to have relationships with people. And that's why I was so drawn to these two ladies about their book. So thank you so much for that. Also, I would like to give you an opportunity, Hannah and Yseult, to talk about this book and how it came about, and tell me how you both met.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Tanya and Renee. I'm personally, and I'm sure Hannah too, super excited to be here. we met at a co-working space only for women, and at a conversation that was meant to speak on how to bridge the gap between white women and women of color. It was an odd conversation because mostly people that were so it's like a fishbowl type of interaction, so people could come in and participate in the conversation, but most of the women that were entering the circle to participate in the conversation were women of color, and then the majority of the room were white women that were not at all participating, which I gladly participated in. That went in and just called it out and said, this feels voyeuristic, and it's odd that white women are not taking the opportunity to participate in a constructive conversation, because it's not our problem as people of color or Black people, but it's a collective issue that, white women in that dynamic conversation have to take part of. And so from there, Hannah and I met and spoke after. It spoke to her. She started a private conversation in her living room, which I went once, and then I traveled a few months in Israel. And then when I came back, I saw that she continued, and I felt like she was genuine about her, intention of wanting to engage in these conversations. And so I proposed that we bring this further and we start having a podcast where the aim is to humanize stories and not stay on statistics and what we think we know about people of color and women of color specifically. And when you humanize people, obviously people connect to you and they like see you as a human, which I think is the prime fundamental issue in these problems in our society, is like people of color are not humanized, minorities are not humanized, and so it's so easy to discard and harm and oppress people that we don't see as our equals. So that's how it started, and then we wrote the book about how to have constructive conversations on an interpersonal level about these issues.
Thank you so much. I was thinking when I was first started reading it, I had to zoom through it because I started having flashbacks of my own childhood. I was born in Omaha and went to a Catholic, white Catholic school, and there's certain ways you have to act when you're there. And then I lived in a Black neighborhood, and then I had to change, or they call it, started coding back and forth. And I didn't know in that time that's what I was doing, but that was the reality. So when I read your book, and then I started reading about, how Hannah grew up. So, Hannah, if you would please tell us a little bit about how you were able to tune in so quickly, because this is not something that's comfortable. And so tell us how you started out when you reached out to Yseult and she brought that up about the meeting, about what was going on and the elephant in the room.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us. It's an honor to be here with you both. The energy is so good. So thank you. I, as Yseult said, met her at a co-working space for women. And at the time, I was pretty naive. I'd been in a relationship with the man who's now my husband for about 5 years at the time, who was a Black man. And meeting him is really what started to take the blinders off for me, because we lived in New York City, which people would think is a very liberal place, but I would see just how differently we were treated as we would walk down the street, or he would tell me about the measures that he took. So it really began to kind of crack the white lens that I looked through the world with. And I attended this event, and like Yseult said, I was one of the many white women who went and sat in the back because I was so uncomfortable. I was afraid to take up space. I didn't know what to say. I feared ridicule. And Yseult rightly pointed out that the intention of the meeting was to have a dialogue, have a conversation, despite any feelings of discomfort. So it was really an aha moment for me. And that's when I thought, okay, this can't just be a one and done dialogue. Several of the women who attended with me agreed. And so I said, let's get together, next month. Let's do this every month. The co-working space wasn't really ready or willing or agile enough to start scheduling that. So I said, okay, we could just use my living room. And it continued and continued, and then led to Kinswomen. And it's definitely been a journey ever since, of unlearning, relearning, and then, writing this book together and doing the work that we've done together as the Kinswomen. And then, of course, 2020 happened, and a lot of people started coming to us, which is ultimately how we got approached to write this book, Real Friends Talk About Race. But I'm so happy for the opportunity, even though it was a crazy experience writing the book. Now, hopefully, we are giving people a framework and, writing from our own personal experiences in the first person about the realities of the complexities and awkwardness and hardships and beauty of having interracial friendships and relationships.
I wanted to jump in for a second because, Hannah, when you talk about the complexities, it's real. And we all are not the total, but a portion of how we are raised and where we are raised and all of those things. And I found interesting sort of at the beginning of the book where you talk about your little sister and the crush that she had on this little boy in her ballet class and your mom's reaction. Could you, because I think it symbolizes sort of the nuances, right? So if you could talk a little bit about that and from your mom's perspective, from your perspective, and really what it means in this conversation that we're having about race.
My mom raised me like I think a lot of, well-meaning, white, liberal, progressive parents of the baby boomer generation raised their kids, which was to be colorblind. And for a long time, I thought that was a really noble, right way to raise kids. And the instance you talk about that I write about in the book is my sister had a crush on a boy that she danced with that I would hear about all the time. And so I would tease her. I'd never seen him. And then when I got eyes on him for the first time, I was maybe 7 years old. I remember I was surprised that he was Black because in my mind, I hadn't pictured him to be Black. And I said to my mom, "Oh, he's Black." And she got really angry with me for saying the word Black or noticing difference. And so from that young formative age, I internalized that noticing race is bad, and that Black was not an okay word to say, and that it was better to just pretend like we didn't see color.
Yeah, it really is a symbol. Yeah, go ahead, Tanya. Yeah.
Well, I was going to reach out to Yseult because I read some of the things she said in the book too, but I mean, that's one of the things I cringe, when I have my friends that are that say, "Oh, I don't see color." I'm like, I want you to see me. I am here. I'm not invisible. This is my color. Again, the later part of my life, I grew up in the South Pacific Islands and I came back to the United States and it was a real big issue. Like, okay, we're still here. We haven't progressed. And so you tell me how you felt. You've ever been asked or people have used that comment, and how do you respond to that?
Oh, the comment about color blindness?
Yes.
I think that for a long time, I think the 90s, it was like a whole propaganda, even through like fashion and arts and like all these like creative spaces, where we don't see color as a mean of like we're equal. And obviously that's really nice, but that's not how society works. And that's just not how the mechanism around how the world sees us works. So on a personal level, that's why like when we have these conversations on an interpersonal level, it's not the same thing as like on a societal level. And but they're connected. And so if someone on an interpersonal level is having a speech that feels really warm and gooey and cute by like I just see you equally, it doesn't resonate with the dynamic that we exist in. And so when we're outside of our like living room, of our playground, of like our friend's house, it plays out differently. So knowing that color does matter, it's not so much about like a personal statement to this individual, which that's how white people have internalized this like color blindness thing. And so but it's more like if you know, then you can be a better advocate. Then if you know, then you can be a better ally. If you know, then you can stand for your friend and you can recognize when something is happening. And by ignoring it, you are choosing to decide to be actively an ally, actively a good friend, actively like a person that can support. And I use the whole gender, because that's like a perfect, because sometimes when we talk about race, white people are like, we don't understand. And it's like, okay, let me put it in a different context. Like, if you're friends with a woman, you want your male friends to understand why feminism is so important, and why toxic patriarchy is a thing for us. It's like, it's okay to see us as like, you're an equal, I see you as a human, I don't care that you're a woman. That's great when we're having dinner and we're interacting. But in reality, if we're at a restaurant, or if I'm applying for a job and I'm experiencing like toxic masculinity and like patriarchy and whatever, I'd like this guy friend to be able to say, hey, that was so weird, I recognize it, even though I see you as an equal, like, I want to stand for you, what can I do, like, how do I become an ally, how do I advocate for you? And like, that's the way we have to see race. And like, the idea of color blindness, I think, was a soft way to skew away from responsibility and personal like advocacy, basically. Yeah.
Or avoidance, because you both talk about that, sort of this not wanting to confront, if we pretend. Yeah.
If you don't confront it, then you don't get in a awkward situation, and you don't, it's like the idea of discomfort is like very much part of like these conversations. It's like you're so scared of being uncomfortable, where like my life is threatened, so it's like a different kind of perception and situation for two people in the same space.
That's right. That's right. I was also struck, and it really resonated, and I'm just going to read this paragraph and sort of unpack it. But it's so we found ourselves in a unique position where previously even mention of the work we were doing sometimes made me feel like a pariah with my white peers. Suddenly, my phone was blowing up with requests to pick our brains about racial issues happening at my friends' jobs and their families and with their partners. White people seemed to wake up en masse, wringing their hands and realizing that our time to act was decades ago. This is, really commenting about sort of the George Floyd catalyst during COVID, and also, Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And I was reflecting, because we've actually fallen asleep again, just as you said in the book, right? And our attention span was not even a nanosecond in the scheme of things, right? And so what, your book that you both wrote is very instructive about sort of steps and, the unpacking. But as a collective, what is it going to take? Is it another tragedy that we are all in lockdown? I'm convinced that if we hadn't been in lockdown, maybe George Floyd wouldn't have had as wide an impact, right? Because we were all glued to the outside through, our TVs, right? So I do believe in how your approach is. Absolutely. It's similar with our approach, right? You have to take it one person at a time, right? That you try and change and hope that ripple effect as you throw into the pond, that they Xerox reproduce themselves in the conversations. But I wonder if both of you could speak to this. Like, is it going to take another tragedy? What wakes our collective conscience again? Because we're in that place, like, let's not talk black, let's not mention, let's not pretend. We're all allies now. We're all one, right? What have we done? I'm just very curious as to your thoughts.
Do you want me to start, Yseult? And then you? Okay. Yes, I mean, you're absolutely right. It is tragic that our attention span as white people, as people who made all of these promises, whether it was time, education, money, back in 2020, we've forgotten. I think part of that is a lack of accountability from each other, because unfortunately, a lot of white people were spurred to act because of how it would look if they didn't, or that they might get canceled if they didn't do something. But people got canceled for like a minute, and then now people are coming back and it's like it never happened. And I'm not saying people have to live with what they did forever, but there's rarely any mention of accountability or of reparation or anything like that. So it's tragic and unacceptable. And I think it speaks to what Yseult was saying. We just have this desire to live in the status quo and to not make ourselves uncomfortable. And I think for white people, something we've said in our work for a really long time is any white person who came into our space, we have done classes and community gatherings, like create an allyship mission statement for yourself and put it somewhere where you can see it, whether that's like on the back of your phone or in your room or in your car or on your fridge. And remember why you were so riled up in 2020 and recognize like what it takes to stay accountable to that. I think like Yseult uses this example a lot. It's like anything else. Like if you become a vegan, you know that it's a daily thing for you to call yourself a vegan. Or you're mostly don't eat meat or animal products. But for allies, I think we think that it's like a state of mind, and it's not. It requires actual action, and it's a verb. And our work is about reminding people of that. But I certainly don't have the answer to motivate all these complacent fellow white people, and to re-energize them. And I hope that it doesn't take another tragedy to reinvigorate the energy that we had in 2020.
I think that tragedies will not make things change. Like they will continue to happen, and things will stay the same unless we look at things differently. And as of now, when it comes to advocacy, I had this conversation. I was invited with my rabbi. We were having the conversation about the book and the relation with like spiritually how I approach the idea of allyship and how I see allyship and how we're supposed to be with one another is very like Jewish, And in Judaism, there's this idea of tikkun olam, which is like it's something that each person on earth, like each Jew, we think that like we're supposed to restore and repair. So it doesn't lie on like love. It's not on like I care or I love. It's a duty. It's like something that you must do as an individual in order to basically be a good person in this world and to have a good impact in your society and your community. And so the idea of it is like you are actively doing something to restore and repair. It's not what you believe. It's not how you feel. If you're a good person, it doesn't lie in like it's not an internalized thing, but it's like a real action that people have to do. And until now, white people, whenever we talk about this, first of all, it's seen as charity, which is like, if you see this as charity, it means that you think you're doing something for someone else. And then unless white people start understanding that they're doing this for themselves and they're doing this to restore the humanity completely robbed from like this generational passed down of like harm and history of just oppression, nothing is going to change. Like, because loving someone, we fall out of love, but the duty that we have for another person because we see that something is wrong doesn't lie on how I feel about this person. I cannot love this person but still feel like this is not right. I need to do something. So I feel like unless we change the dogma of what an allyship is and how are people supposed to be, advocating for things are just going to stay the same. And that's why a lot of people showed that they were good people just to check a box, but then they really did nothing behind it because they felt like they were not concerned. Like, I showed that I'm a good person, and then I'm not concerned because it's a you problem. Like, I just want to show that I'm good with you, and it shows no implication of actual action in resolving a collective issue. So that's
I'm sorry.
Well said. I was listening at one of your quotes where you said allyship isn't something you do for the glory, but for the sake of humanity.
Yeah. For yourself, by the way. It's internalized humanity. It's not humanity for us. It's humanity for yourself. There's multiple studies now that show that, there's this passed down gene of trauma. Like, we've seen it with studies done with people that survived the Holocaust. There's other studies that are being done now with survivors from the Holocaust in Rwanda, the genocide that happened against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And so it's like, this is passed down. if trauma is passed down, the other things are being passed down. Like I don't believe that there's only one thing. So how do we address this like generational harm or generational oppression that lies in these people? Like you have to address it for yourself.
Yeah.
And so that's a way of like, I'm throwing the ball on you. You need to fix it for yourself. Like, forget about us, because we're always speaking up for ourselves. Everything that we've had as minority has come from us. It hasn't come from anyone being nice or loving us. It's by fighting. It's by dying. It's by, protesting. It's by demanding justice, not by asking and by kindness being given.
Yeah, I was also struck by something you just said, Yseult, where you said, I don't remember your exact words, but basically, by not addressing this, it harms your own self, right?
Uh-huh.
And I was struck by Frederick Douglass said this 100 and
Wow.
60. I don't do math well. He said it a long time ago.
No.
In his memoir, like we just read this as part of our elephant you don't see in the room dialogue. We read his own, and they were powerful. This is his words about his journey. And what he said about slavery was that unless we address it, like everybody has to address it, because it harms the slave holders.
Yes.
Just as much. And it's the same, exactly. And it's the same 100%. Principle that we're talking about, that it's, as you said, it's like we all have to care about ourselves to engage in this. And it's not, as you said, for you or for me or Tanya to teach everyone else. You have to be vested, because even if it's just for selfish reasons, because you don't want to hurt yourself.
Now, Hannah, you said you have been approached about writing the book. I mean, that almost is like a sign of help us with the book. Tell me about how that came about.
Yes. So we were approached by an agent who saw an interview that we did with New York Magazine in July of 2020. And I think she approached us in October of 2020 of that year. And we definitely benefited from white agents, white editors at publishing houses wanting to have books like ours on their roster. Unfortunately, in the publishing world, there's so much of these same systemic issues. And we encountered those in the process of writing this book too. We worked with a well-meaning white editor. We didn't have any Black editors or editors of color on our team, and that definitely impacts the way that the book comes out. These people did their best, and they were very, as open as they could be to what Yseult would, the feedback she would give them and the feedback that I'd give them. But we had this opportunity, which was an incredible opportunity. And also it kind of speaks to the urgency, but then the decline in energy that we've seen since 2020. So it was a great opportunity for us. But at the same time, like, we learned recently that the company that published our book, its readers were going on strike because of a lack of equitable practices, hiring and salary practices. So I can speak on this. I made sure it was okay with our editor to speak about this, because I told them, like, I was going to make a statement that I stood with the union, and I don't want to obviously like jeopardize or insult our awesome team who gave us this opportunity. But it's really about just showing that there are systemic issues, like, all through the publishing industry, like through every industry, and that even their support of a book like ours doesn't necessarily mean that, like, they get to check the box and move on. Like, this work continues from a top to bottom. So the experience, which we've talked about on our podcast, was had a lot of highs and lows for us both, writing with each other, dealing with our editor and publisher. I will say, like, our agent's been amazing, but yes, we were approached in the fall of 2020. And I don't think, if not for George Floyd, we would have had this opportunity at that time. Kinswomen was only a year old by the time we got that opportunity, and I think we were, we don't regret it, but we definitely benefited from the heightened energy and focus that summer.
I do wonder, I'm sorry, Sean, just before you ask your next question, I do wonder, and this is the cynical Renee speaking, whether those invitations or the seeking out of both of you or others for books like this are as, people, whether these companies, entities, publishers are as aggressive, right? Or is it performative?
Well, whatever step they need to do to get to ring the bell, but I do want to say this.
Too. Yeah.
There's one word that, we've been using a lot. And I know there's somebody in the audience that says allyship. How do I become part of this? And what does that, how would you define it to them as far as their role and their responsibility in the allyship?
Yeah, it's we've spoken a lot about this, but my stand or my school of thought when it comes to allyship, as I said, it's not so much a title, but it's more your actions and what you're doing. The reason, like one of the interview that we had, which is so funny because like the person that did the interview was so like shocked that I said this, and she's a Black woman. She was like, "Oh shit, like I never heard that before. Like I've never heard it like that before." But I had told her that like I don't accept people or white people specifically saying that they're allies. Like you can't come to me and tell me you're an ally unless I've seen that you are. And so it's not something that you can claim for yourself, but you have to let it for the people that you're trying to be an ally give you as a title, right? And so so I think that like that also goes into the implication that you are asking, you're demanding action and proof of a said statement. And until now, being an ally has been just like a title. And it has just been like a sticker and like a thing that people post on Instagram or whatever, but it doesn't show anything else. Like we have had conversation with people where it's just like, that's really nice that you want to say that you're an ally to this group, but like, what are you doing? You need to prove, you need to show, like, what organization are you like working with? Who are you hiring? Like, how are you hiring? Like, transparency has to be part of this word in order to create validity in said, whatever people are saying that they are. And also, like, historically, we have to remember, like, at least for me, I don't trust, like, there's this inherent distrust towards like white people that like, as much as I have love for people, like for everyone, and my heart is, I'm friends with people from all around the world or whatever, but when it comes to these conversations, I'm sorry, there's been so much in history. Why are we going to act like there's nothing on the table? Like there's no background, there's no baggage. Like we have this in an interpersonal relationship with a friend. If a friend has continuously done things to you that's not right, we start seeing them differently. We start taking a step, or we start being careful. It's the same thing. And like white people hate knowing this, but it's like it makes sense. Like we are human beings. Like we are hurt. We are affected by what has happened to us, to our ancestors, to people like us. And so it makes sense that you have to build and you have to prove and you have to show before anyone gives you any type of credit. And you cannot give yourself credit. That's for sure. And I think we've let people give themselves credit for things where we were like, who are you? Like, what's going on? Like it makes no sense. So I think that like we just need to keep it real, like let's just be real, like anything else. And that's what allyship is like doing the work, making sure that you're showing paw, and like you're like, you're proving that you mean what you're saying. Because just saying that you're an ally doesn't mean anything, at least for me.
Yeah, I found that really the underpinning of the book. It's about being real, right? Your actions have to match your words. Well, your actions have to match your words.
Really,
in its simplistic form. That's really what you're saying. What you both are saying throughout it. Like, don't. And this is what I tell people a lot. I always say, like, don't tell me, show me. That's it.
Yeah.
That is it. I get so tired of, like, I don't want to hear all that. Show me, just show me. And that's life, not just in this conversation, but that's everything. Like, okay. So yeah, it was really a comment. The spectrum of racism. I have to say that chapter, some light bulbs went on, like things I'd experienced, and I just never. Am I just so dumb? Like, I couldn't articulate. I just kind of, kind of how I was raised is like, I'm not going to waste time on silliness or inane or like, okay, it doesn't make sense. I don't quite understand what's happening here. But you really framed it for me. It's like, oh, Renee, boy, you are really good.
Absolutely, Renee. I lived with parents who were like that. My mother was like, it's okay, it's okay. And my father was a Black Panther. No, it's not okay. So I'm sitting there like,
right, but just some of the subtleties definitely have lived and walked, but I'm just like, whatever. It's your problem, but you actually articulated well. It's like, oh, okay. So, question. This is further on in the book, towards the last quarter of the book. In our effort to find common ground, we draw false equivalencies that only highlight our lack of true understanding. Sounds very familiar in everyday life. It's best for us to listen and validate people of color when they share their experiences and allow space around those vocalizations without jumping in with what we might see as our similar experiences of oppression. So let's unpack that. How can people jump in to talk about their, not actual, but shared experiences, and why? What does that actually look like?
I feel like that's when I think, let's take a white woman who's friends with a Black woman. If the Black friend is sharing her experiences of racism, and, maybe it's some of those subtleties, Renee, that you were reading about in that spectrum of racism chapter that we as white people will never experience. And it's so not even on our radar. When we hear something like that shared by a friend, which I really think is a gift and a show of trust, I think often the impulse, because it feels so uncomfortable for us as white people, is to be like, oh my gosh, I get it, because this happened to me at work where a guy, cut me off in the conference room and I was, speaking, and then he took credit for my ideas. It's like, we want to be like, oh yeah, me too. And I think that can be really harmful. It's like, obviously the impulse to connect is really strong for us as humans, but this is definitely an area where we need to just pause and take a second. And then another impulse that I've seen from white people is, and I definitely used to do this myself, is if a friend is telling us about a racial issue or any kind of racism or xenophobia that they've been experiencing, we then will add on with like, oh yeah, something similar happened to my friend. It's like, why are we adding, like, just to be like, oh yeah, I see it too, like, and here's another horrible thing that's happened to somebody. No, I think that can be so damaging. Like, people aren't asking for that extra trauma. And I just don't think that white people, it's good to have awareness, but I also don't think we should get any extra points for like noticing, I think sometimes we're like, oh, I see it. But then it's like, well, but what are you doing about it? So yeah, that's when I wrote that, that's what I meant, is like, instead of like jumping on to make sure that your friend also knows that, to show that you understand them by sharing your experience, just listen, because we don't understand. There's so much that we don't understand.
Yeah. Yseult, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think as we're humans, and especially when in an interpersonal interaction, we want to feel like our friend, they tell us something and we're just like, oh, me too, like, I think it's an instinctive reaction that comes from like a really kind loving place, right? But at the same time, the reason why we bring it up in the book is that people shouldn't do it because it feels like erasure. It feels like dismissive, and it just like how do you say this, like creates like a bigger wedge between this person. And sometimes when we're experiencing something that's difficult, whatever that may be, we just need an ear, and we don't even need someone to like give me a solution. We have those friends where every time we tell them something, they're like, oh my god, like let me like what can I do? And it's just like, nah, sis, I just want you to listen to me. Like, I don't need a solution. I just need you to be, oh damn, like that sucks. And that's the truth, because like sometimes you don't have a solution, you can't fix it, but you just want a friend to listen to you. And but this applies specifically in interpersonal interaction with when two friends are having a conversation. Now if we're talking about a situation where it's just like a workspace and you have someone that has power and that has leverage that's being told something, it's like listening and then saying, oh okay, so how would you like me to support you in this moment? Like then you have power to ask, like, how can I be of a support? Like, what would you like me to do? And I think that like knowing these things when they happen and understanding like when we can ask for, hey, what would you need from me right now? It's just like now we understand that like when someone tells us a story, you ask them, so would you like my opinion right now? Would you want me to just listen? And I think that we have to normalize these type of interaction. We have to normalize these type of conversations because this is real things. And so these are people. So having more conversation about it is only going to make it so much more like human and so much more easy to have and feel more comfortable on an interpersonal. Then when you have power, you're like, what would you like me to do? Like, what do you think I should do? Because obviously this person will know what they need in that moment rather than you saying like, okay, I'm going to do a grand gesture of whatever that might be. That might even hurt this person. So conversation, asking like is like absolutely fundamental.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book, both of you, that trust is the bedrock
Oh yeah.
for all of this.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And you give great tips about how you build trust. But I do think we have a question from a colleague of Tanya's. Tanya, do you want to take it?
Oh, yes. I have Terry. Terry is from the Alabama district EEOC. I see here, do you find that the younger generations, 30s and below, are open to talk about race? Younger whites don't feel the racial burden of their elders. Younger than whites may not have as many racial scars.
Mm. Mm.
You see more racial unity within protests of young voters, for instance.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that like racism shows differently and shows differently in our society and also shows differently in how we've processed it. But it's very much there. And even if we have younger generation that's like more into wanting to stand, which is great. I love that, for us. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's not there, or it doesn't mean that like the younger people that of color are not don't have racial scars. Like I'm sorry, my little brother, that he mainly grew up in the US in Princeton, New Jersey, and we experienced things where he's at some because he plays violin, but he played violin since he was a child. And so a white teacher, of course, he was in Princeton has a lot of like um Indian um population like that come and live because they work in pharmaceutical companies and stuff like that. So it's not an all white space at all, but it's like Asian and then uh sorry, and Indians. And so like my brother being a black boy, it's just not it's he's not the majority in that minority. And so when he was asked that he wanted to be part of the orchestra, the teacher said no, it's not a good idea because the orchestra was mainly Asian kids, Central Asia. So like they were like no, like and the lady the teacher, her whole thing was like, no, he won't have time, he won't do good in school. while my brother was already doing Christian, like he rode horses since he was like 4. He had such a busy schedule, like busier than mine, but like he was so busy already, and the teacher was like, no, like he's not gonna have time, he's not gonna do good in school. My mother had to go in and have these conversations. She's had these conversations with me, and we have 14 years difference. She's had conversation with me, she had conversation with my other brother where we have 5 years, and then she had conversation with my little brother who's like 21. So it's like it doesn't go away, it's there. But I think that like what's great is like now we have more language, we have more vocabulary, people are very much more like sitting on their edge, which I love that. I love that white people feel less and less comfortable with these things, and they're just like, we can't say anything. Now you can't say anything. like I love that state of things, but it just shows differently, but it's very much there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think younger people show a more willingness, and sometimes people that are, older or even my age, they're more reluctant. They want to sit back and be spectators. And the younger people are saying, I'm willing to go in with both feet. I don't know what to expect. I don't have any experiences.
But haven't we always in this country, I'm sorry, Hannah,
Oh yeah.
Haven't we always in this country said, oh, the problem with race will be solved with the young people because they don't see color, right? If that was true, all the young people in the 50s and the 60s and all the marches, we wouldn't even be sitting here.
Yeah.
It would not be a conversation.
Yes. You're absolutely right.
Back to what Yseult says, like there's like, and actually what Hannah said as well, like we have to work at this every day, all of us.
Yes.
Just because of things that have passed down and looking through the white lens. But anyway, I'm sorry, Hannah, please.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think maybe especially this younger Gen Z generation, they think they're so great in so many ways, but they maybe think that they carry this badge of allyship because a lot of them are really proud to have labels, whether that be neurodivergence or queer. And I love how open and accepting and reclaiming the younger generation is. And at the same time, I think for younger white folks, it can make us like, if we identify as queer or neurodivergent, and I've seen this in my own work with younger people. I'm 36, so I'm kind of like, Yseult and I are the same age. We're both born in 87, so we're kind of in that middle, space where we're not really the young people anymore. But I've seen with the young people is that because they might identify with like one of those other identities, that with the race stuff, they're like, oh no, I get it. Similarly to what, we were talking about before. So I think it can actually like get a little bit more complex because there's maybe more awareness with access to TikTok and social media and seeing things happening around the globe every single day. There's more awareness, but like how that actually impacts our young generation in real life and how they're dealing with, microaggressions at school. With my nonprofit that I'm on, we go into schools and like these things are happening, as young as elementary and middle school. So the younger generation is not exempt from these dialogues at all. And I'm just thinking about my own family. Like my dad's in his 70s, my younger sister's in her 20s. I feel like I've had more, honest conversations about this with my dad than with my sister, who's maybe part of that generation of like, no, I'm already woke because, I'm in this generation. But my dad's a little more willing to be like, okay, I get that I don't get it,
Yeah.
I want to talk about, I know that I'm moving on to chapter 9. I'm probably going to skip around and get back to chapter 7 with the interracial friendships. But I want to talk about Black fishing, digital blackface, and cultural appropriateness. Tell me where that came from and why you felt that was important to put that in the book.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't come up with blackfishing. Blackfishing has been existing. A lot of people have been talking about it, and there's actually I've come to learn about the same version of it in Europe, where people, instead of like blackfish, they like mimic Arab like basically it's like Arab girls being mimicked. The same thing, but for like Arab features, because there's a big population of like Northern African Arab people in France and in Belgium and stuff. So it's real, it exists. But I think that like the reason why I thought it was important to bring it up is that we think that things are done because they don't look like what they were like 40 years ago or 50 years ago or like 20 years ago. And so we're like, oh, we don't do blackface anymore, so that doesn't exist anymore. But what we don't understand, or like what some people seem to want to like ignore or look over, is that racism really morphs. It morphs into devices that we use. It morphs into technology. It morphs in education. It morphs in ways that is adaptive to the things that we use and the way we live, because it's ingrained in the people that are creating these devices, these spaces, these things. So obviously, like, it's not because we're moving with time that things are going to change, unless we address the things that are making these problematic you know things like blackfishing be possible, right? It's the same thing as like with when you think about therapy, where people are like, oh, with time I'll feel better. It's just like that. With time, it's just, maybe at first you were really angry and like you were yelling or whatever, and then you stop yelling, but you're still like eaten up by your trauma. You have to talk about it. You have to actively address it. And it's the same thing with like online, like blackface. Modern version of blackface is like, it's gonna look differently, and so it looks like a compliment, but it's not a compliment. It's actually a recall of like something that we thought we had gotten rid of, but that just shows up differently.
Yeah. Go ahead, Tanya.
Oh, no, I was just saying that, discrimination is like a mouse in the wall. You never know where, when it's going to come out. And
But it's everywhere. It's everywhere all the time.
We can stand on chairs and scream, but unless we actually, engage with the mouse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One of our faithful viewers, Miss Vivian, asked the question, and we kind of talked a little bit about it, but she asked, why did you write the book? Now, we've heard that you were approached, and we know about the Kinswomen podcast that predated George Floyd and all the things that woke up sort of the consciousness. But being asked is something different from saying yes. And so maybe unpack that a little bit for us, Vivian.
Go ahead, Hannah.
Okay. Well, thank you for that question, Vivian. I think the desire to write this book is very much related to what we were talking about earlier, which is the lack of energy and consistency that we've seen or haven't seen since 2020. I feel so privileged to be able to write this book with Yseult, and as a white woman. As I said in the book, I'm not an expert on racism. I don't directly experience it. I am Jewish. I've experienced anti-Semitism, but I am a white woman and have so much privilege. So the reason I wanted to write this book is so that other white people like me, well-meaning, liberal, like voted for Obama, left-leaning people could learn from my mistakes and hopefully get through the learning lessons that I've encountered a little bit quicker. And I thought it was so important for Yseult and I to both write in our own first person voice so that we could show how we have, even though we're the same age, met working in the same place, we've had such different experiences. I also wanted to show like the realities of our friendship. Like people look at us and they're like, oh my gosh, la-di-da, it's a interracial friendship. They see it maybe smiling pictures on social media, but we wanted to give people a glimpse into like what it's actually like, what our conversations are actually like. So the same reason that I we moved from the living room sessions to the podcast, the book gives an opportunity for these dialogues to reach a greater population. I want everyone to read this book. I really do. I mean, I think people can have this dialogue, whether these are so necessary, like they need to be had in workplaces, in homes, around dinner tables, with friends, in the group chat, all the time, especially if we're white. Like, the onus is really on us. So I hope that answers your question, Vivian.
And Yseult, did you want to add
Yeah,
anything?
I wanted to write this book because I was like, kind of, I grew up between Europe and the States. I grew up in an interracial family. My father's white, my mom's Black, African, and I was sick and tired of like the idea that assimilating in white culture and having babies with white people and be friends with white people was a sign that things were better. And I wanted people to know that the closer you get to white people, the more it hurts on the real. Like the more harmful moments that I've had was people that I've let close to me. And I think that like it's really important to talk about the real things. And it's not because you talk about the really icky things that things can't change, but we have to speak on things. Like we have to let go of this like ideal image that there's a post-racial era just because people are having children with each other, just because people are marrying each other, just because human beings are human beings. Like interracial children have always existed, uh back in slavery, back in like segregation era, like they've always existed. So it's not a show of not of anything. And I just wanted people to take responsibility that like we need to talk about things. Like I don't want to be the only one to be uncomfortable. I want everyone in the room to be uncomfortable with me. If we're going to like, if I'm going to be uncomfortable, if I walk into space and I'm uncomfortable because of white people, I need y'all to be uncomfortable too. And I want you to know what we're thinking. And I hope that it really speaks to people of color and minorities in general, um uh because I think I really wanted to say things that like I always thought, but I didn't have the opportunity to say. And so this book was for me a way to say these things, and for like normalizing discourse, normalizing discomfort. And that's the only place things can really change, is by being honest, not by making it seem like everything is sanitized and smell good and looks good. And like, that's just not how things change.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. We're actually reaching almost to the end. Kyla, is there another question maybe we can take quickly? If not, I would ask, okay, here we go. So this is to Yseult. Has your religion and or sexual orientation preference ever been a barrier for you as a Black woman, and when having race conversations?
No, it's never been a barrier. I think it's like learning how to navigate these things and intersect them in a way that feels cohesive and true to who I am. But it's not a barrier. It's just like I personally refuse to put things in like boxes as if they don't interact with each other. So I've worked really well into like I'm very comfortable in all the things that I am, and I speak on everything that I am. And that's been my goal, to be able to speak of everything that I am all the time without taking anything out. But it's not a barrier. I think it's a opportunity to have a perspective that englobes so many like kind of like visions of things. And I use that as a way to really like assess, like see things and be able to see, okay, what am I really looking at, like what am I because when you start intersecting things, when you start intersecting history, intersecting conversations, you realize how like keeping people in boxes has been weaponized to like not speak on the greater good of things that have to change. Right.
That's not me.
Sorry.
Sorry, that was me. Sorry.
I'm joking. No, I wasn't trying to call it out. I'm just being silly. So thank you. We actually have reached the end. I want to thank you, Yseult and Hannah, for
you.
this conversation, and hopefully this is just the beginning for people that are listening to recognize that we all have a stake in this. We all have a responsibility, each and every one of us on this earth. And we're only talking about this country at the moment, but we know that this transcends to every culture and to every country, right? We're not just calling America out. Every country has their racism, and it's real. So we want everybody, please, to read this book. We encourage you to purchase this book, Real Friends Talk About Race. We encourage you to purchase it if you can at your local independent bookstore. And if you can't do that, check it out from the library, our partners here, Prince George's County Memorial Library System, or the library wherever you are. Just a quick plug. We are starting a new series with our library partners. It's called the Rock Band Book Series. We're reading the 13 most challenged books of 2020 as defined by the American Library Association. And we start our first on Wednesday at 6:30 at the Hyattsville Library, where we are going to read Gender Queer. Gender Queer. And we're going to go through all 13 books that everybody has been seeing in the news and the media and all of the uproar. We're going to read them, and we're going to talk and learn from each other. So we encourage you to join us the second Wednesday of every month. We're taking it to different libraries. It will be in person. So thank you. Thank you, Tanya, for joining us as co-host. Thank you, Yseult, for bringing your words of wisdom. Thank you, Hannah, for bringing your words of wisdom and your collective lived experiences. So we've learned a lot. We're going to end, but we ask you, ladies and Tanya, please do not leave. Stay with us, even as we say goodbye to everyone else. So thank you. Everyone have a wonderful and safe day.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Renee.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Renee and Tanya and Yseult. Thank you, everyone watching.
Absolutely.
Thank you.